in attendance. At this time, if you can, please stand and we will recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if we can, bow our heads for one moment in silent invocation. All right. Thank you. You may be seated. All right. Now, number 4 on our agenda item for the, public comment. I'm sorry. I always managed to skip that one. All right. At this time, we will open the floor for public comment. If there's anybody in the audience that would like to speak, please approach the podium and do so. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And if you would, please state your name and address. And at this time, we'll open up public comment. And seeing that there's no one in the audience, I'll refer to Mr. Dines to see if we have anybody online, sir, who may want to speak. All right. That said, we will close the public comment period and move on to item number 4 on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes. We've got 2 to look at this time. The first being the March 29th, 2022 meeting minutes, and the second being the May 10th. So if you would please direct your attention to the March 29th, 2022 meeting minutes. And if you have any questions, concerns, comments, please raise those now. We will address them and adjudicate them as needed. All right. If there are no comments or concerns, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the 29 March 2022 Planning Commission meeting.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? And 2 abstentions. Motion passes. Oh, 3. Okay, Mr. Moss still. So we can still pass it, right? Yeah. We had 3 abstentions. 4, yeah, we're good. It passes. Sorry. Simple math at 7 p.m. is not, especially on Flag Day. All right, we'll move on to the May 10th meeting minutes, if we could, please. All right. And for this one, there we go. This was a little bit, the meeting minutes were a little shorter for this one, yeah. If there are no concerns, or if there are concerns, please express those now. If they're not, we will ask for a motion to approve the 10 May meeting minutes.
So moved.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? And abstentions? One abstention. Motion passes. Thank you all. Next item on the agenda is Community Planning Liaison Officer, Naval Support Facility, South Potomac. Mr. Hastings, how are you doing this evening? Good. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. Unfortunately, NSA South Potomac needs more time to prepare its inputs to the proposed military compatibility area overlay district. We understand the county is operating on a schedule for adopting the overall zoning and subdivision ordinance update, but NSA South Potomac is unable to meet the upcoming 20 June deadline for submitting text to the draft MCAOD. If possible, a delay would be beneficial to our process for collecting internal inputs, and we believe this would ultimately improve the final product. NSA South Potomac would like to thank the staff of the Department of Community Development, as well as the Berkeley Group, for their support and guidance throughout this process, and look forward to continuing to work with the Planning Commission and King George County on this important issue. Thank you.
How much of a delay do you need?
I would like to get back to you specifically. Thank you.
Oh, do you know, was the GIST file successfully transferred and ingested?
I'm sorry?
The GIST file, the overlay of the,
Yes, the planning staff has been great. And they've been very patient throughout this, and we thank them. And yeah, I think that issue was still being worked on, and hopefully we can pick it up again in the near future.
so do you have what you need or not yet, Heather?
We have the beginnings of a map. We're just not, we're not ready to finalize it.
Okay,
But thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hastings.
So from the county's perspective, it'll be a map that follows property lines rather than just an oval.
I think that's kind of where one of the many things that we're struggling is the military doesn't seem to want to have it specific to parcels, whereas for us, for enforceability, it would have to follow those property lines instead of just being, you know, an idea of a half mile, a mile, etc. So those are some of the details that we're still trying to get worked out.
As long as we meet the mileage distance that the Navy wants, what difference would it make to them if we followed property lines?
I cannot answer that. Thank you.
Comment, leave it at that.
All right. Any further comments on that topic? If not, we will move on to item number 6 on our agenda, which is plan review, of which we have none. Item number 7 is public hearings, of which we also have none this evening. Number 8, moving on to old business, zoning and subdivision ordinance updates, Articles 4 and 5. And we will turn the floor over to Ms. Hall.
So as stated today, at the request of Dahlgren, we are not going to discuss the military overlay. However, because you guys were unable to receive your packets last month, which I hope all of you have received your packets this month, I wanted to, you only knew the frustration, but I'm glad that you all received your packets this month, but I wanted to give you another opportunity to go over the use matrix in more detail. Some of it will be repetitive from last month as we already gave Berkeley some pretty good guidance, but if you want to either go page by page of each use, or if you want to bring up certain topics at your discretion, I'm completely up to you.
Who wasn't here last time? Ross, that's right. So, and Mr. Watkins. So I don't want to dive right into it, but since we're talking about stuff, I want to get y'all's thoughts on the multiple homes on individual lots.
Mother-in-law suite.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to monopolize it. We can jump in wherever y'all want, but I just wanted to get their thoughts on that in particular. So
I understand the imperative for it. I don't object to it in general, but it is a difficult thing to read how it might fit into certain zoning districts. Really giving it a lot of thought. Was there a lot of discussion on it?
yeah, I think we had good discussion on that. Probably more than any other topic. What did we really get into last time?
So we talked about setting some requirements for it. But I think we, in general, we thought it was a pretty decent idea. But we did recognize what he's saying is that on some lots, it's not very practical. So we talked about setting an acreage requirement, and based on that acreage requirement, how many square feet that additional dwelling unit could be. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm very comfortable with that. I mean, you're obviously not going to put it in a townhouse and add one. So if we put some restrictions on where and under what circumstances, I'm still fine with that.
Yeah, we had also discussed the potential for making it like a ratio based on the primary dwelling. So there was a lot of discussion,
Yeah.
and I think we just kind of agreed in general, but we need to get more specific.
So as a reminder, the use matrix is just talking about the specific uses that we have in our ordinance, the definition, and what districts we may want it to be by right, by special exception, or not permitted. The actual standards for each one of those uses will be at a later date. So that was great feedback for the Berkeley group to kind of know what you guys were looking for. So when they get ready to design those standards, that's kind of what they'll be looking for, lot size, ratio to the house, et cetera.
Is it even practical in R1, 2, or 3?
That's a good question.
Right.
Because those are typically subdivided lots with minimum lot sizes already.
Right. Now there may be, a fluke R1 that has 2 acres.
Yeah.
And that might be something that you look at by special exception. Whereas, perhaps in A1 and you have 10 acres and you want to put a mother-in-law, you may not want to see those by special exception, or maybe you do. Kind of given that limitation and what parameters you want to see them in.
So I did have a question on the resort community district. We don't have much of that in the county.
We don't have
Have
any of
any
that currently in the
anymore?
county.
Okay.
It's the same as mixed use. Any of that would have to apply for a rezoning. So you would see that GDP, et cetera, ahead of time. So the use matrix takes our existing definition, our existing title of that particular use, and they tried to combine. Some of them are repetitive and could be combined into one definition and improve upon. Some of them also needed improvement based on state code, and then they showed in the use matrix of how we currently permit it and read what changes they would recommend. And then, of course, on the far right column, which ones they would recommend use standards. As I said before, that they would come back with what those specific standards would be at a later date. So we're just looking at uses and definitions and the zoning classifications at this time.
Where did I have some questions about the agritourism and the event venue.
Okay.
If I recall correctly, as we were discussing on an application for an event venue some time ago, staff was arguing that the event venue was covered under agritourism, and if we denied an application, we could be coming up against state code.
So the state code, for example, a winery. By agricultural right, I can grow the grapes, make the wine, and have a tasting room. But what we have seen is a lot of wineries or typical agricultural settings are now doing event venues or wedding venues and things of that nature. So the agricultural side is by right use. However, the event venue is regulated by our ordinance. So if that winery were to start holding wedding venues or wedding events, they would have to come to you guys for a special exception, as you have seen.
The reason I'm asking is because it's split up in this matrix. On page 2, you talk about agritourism, and there's no mention of the event venue there. And then on page 18, we talk about the event venue and whether it's by right or special exception. Are you comfortable with that?
You said page 18.
Yeah.
Give me just a second.
Yeah, item 57.
So the agritourism comes directly out of state code. And that's, you know, the growing the grapes, the produce stand, the pick your own produce, all of that is within the agritourism.
But not wedding venue, and you're okay with that?
Correct. Wedding venues would still fall under the event venue, which would be a special exception in the A1 and A2 district.
Okay. Just one note on wording then, I think proposed definition for event venue says a business where the primary use is to host. I think it should probably read a business where the primary purpose is to host. Because when you say use, you're talking about land use, and this is usually an ancillary use.
On the
An
event
venue is
venue,
usually ancillary or secondary to the primary use of farm or residence.
are you talking about the event venue definition?
Yes.
So the event venue is not limited to just agricultural. So if I wanted to open up a commercial space like a banquet hall, that would fall under an event venue.
A full-time use.
Yes, sir. Yes. And that's why they have made the changes of C1 and C2 being by right. And the A1 and A2 by special exception.
Which is the way it is now.
Yes.
Okay.
Going off that, if it's not the primary use though, like it's a winery all days of the year except 12 times it's an event venue, would it need that special exception for an event venue because that's not the primary purpose of it?
With the way that it's written, where the business where the primary use.
If I can add to that,
Oh, I see what you're saying now, that we need to expand for those wineries that have it as a secondary use. I'm following you now.
we've also approved event venues for residences in A2 district where the primary use is residential.
Yes,
So
correct.
was just afraid that this might cut those uses out.
No, that wasn't our intention.
Okay.
Thank you.
So some of the other things that we talked about were home businesses. We touched on breweries. In lieu of going page to page, I mean, we could do that, whatever y'all would like to do. If we want to go page to page, or is there anything in particular that y'all would like to visit specifically, or? Well, let's do that then. Let's go down and we can each visit individually. Mr. DeCorder, is there anything you'd like to?
I'm just going to recommend to go page by page. You know, I marked up the one from last month, which I don't have with me, but I have some questions. I have some.
Okay.
Page. Just a methodology that keeping of chickens, A1, A2, A3, there's no, that's blank.
What page are you on, sir?
On,
Page 1, okay.
is that
Oh, well,
residential chickens, is that captured in agricultural use or agritourism use or some other? Someone wants to keep 5 hens in A2.
so, you want me to agricultural so it says agricultural residential, with the keeping of chickens, which would be by right in R1, R2 with the standards that we previously created. Does that, go ahead.
By right in A1, A2.
Yes, under the agricultural / silviculture definition.
Mentioned working in agritourism and a honeybee farm. They can sell, they can be got, okay.
Right.
And then resort community, I know we don't have any, but I know that we covered by an agritourism.
What
What
page are you?
Stable commercial on 4. They deleted that and resort community also. Reason, I was gonna ask the reason for deletion.
I'm not sure of the exact reason, but there might be a resort community with some horse keeping of horses or things like that. We can,
Big business,
we can suggest that be put back.
On item 6, roadside
Huh?
farm stand, we
Oh, man, I'm sorry.
exclude R1 and 2. Is there any reasons for a special exception or just?
We don't typically have them in the residential area. They're usually within agricultural or, as a retail sales within a commercial building.
Marie's cakes on 4/6. The bed and breakfast standard on page 3, item 9, 15 bedrooms. Is that from a benchmark or
Right. So you had to have some sort of limitation to differentiate between a hotel, motel, and a bed and breakfast. And 15, I believe, is what our current ordinance had listed, and they just kept that number.
Because that at that point, isn't that the threshold for ADA compliance and such as well?
I believe you're right, Ms. Parker.
thinking of the base requirements, I can conceive of pavilion off-base housing that is essentially bed and breakfast construction and format. That's becoming more and more popular in bases throughout the South. But some of those have, 30, 40, 50, but are not hotel. So open that to consideration. 15 seems about right for me, in the sense it won't be a bed and breakfast anymore, but the acute shortage of base housing, I heard the base is sending people into Fredericksburg into hotels, because our hotels are full. We talked about daycare and
we did.
in nice
Yeah, did
Dwellings, yeah.
anybody have any concerns about daycare or adult care? If I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, those were also brought into alignment with state codes, correct?
That's-
Everything
that's
was
correct.
just brought back into kind of like check, right?
Mhm.
On page 4, item 11, we talked about accessory dwellings. The current matrix adds established, makes it a by right all the way through the R1, R2, R3. Is that the intent?
I think that is one of the items that Berkeley Group is going to go back and work on, given the feedback from last month. So the matrix that you have now, Berkeley Group has not revised since last month.
Yeah, I think we had some comments on that. But again, it goes back to as well, right? We can, on the back end of this, we can put specifications about what the requirements are going to be once we nail it down. I guess for this conversation, does anybody take objection to by right in anything? Because it is currently, Mr. DeCourt is correct, from A1 all the way to R3, it's now by right. So is that worth a discussion? Does anybody have any
In looking at the summary from the Berkeley Group, we did have a note here that says to remove it from the R3 zoning district,
Okay.
just as a reminder.
Nineteen group home, is that? I just have a question about, do they have to have a license before they have a plan? Or do we allow them to build it and then?
If you build it, they will come.
So this, go ahead.
I was gonna say they would build it as a dwelling, so it would have to get a building permit as a dwelling, but before you can get a building permit for a second dwelling, you'd either have to comply with whatever standards you wish to impose, or if you want to put a requirement for a special exception from the board before they receive that building permit for an accessory dwelling.
Were you talking about accessory dwellings or group homes? Group
I think
homes.
he's talking about dwellings. Yes, those.
So
those would need to be.
this would be in line with the requirement of state code, and it would be up to the state of Virginia in order to get that license. So they would bring that license to us, get a zoning permit so that they can get a business license in King George County.
That would be sequence of that.
There's a check and balance there, yes, sir.
It's not by right to operate it, it's by right to get a license to operate.
Correct.
We talked about Westmoreland's home shop ordinance.
The rural business.
Yeah, there are three, the thing going from 2 levels to 3 levels.
See,
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it's important to get right. I think we'll have more of that than less than that.
Yeah.
Go with along with group homes for elderly people. But the Westmoreland proposed ordinance, sample ordinance was focused on the crafts and trades. To make sure that, crafts, artists, Marie's Cakes, these sorts of people have the fewest barriers.
Right. So the discussion that we had was staff had seen that there was, currently we only have a home occupation in which you can only have one person outside the home come to work for you daily, and you cannot have any people come to your home as customers. And then the next level is a commercial business, that there was no in-between step. So this would create an in-between step of those who have, let's say 10 acres and I run a small plumbing business and I keep everything inside, is that something that we should consider? That, there's no 0 to 60 is just not working for King George County. And it's a way for us to be more small business friendly and provide kind of those stepping stones that are required for a small business to start up.
Just, I know it can be sensitive because it can be noxious. There are a lot of downsides, which is why it's important to get it right. So
Right. So that'll come with those use standards at a later time.
a lot depends on use standards, as many of these will. We went through daycare, life care, shelter.
Yeah, and if anyone else has any questions as we go through these, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so some of the things that I pause at when I see big swaths of change. Like for instance, page 10, number 34. School, education facility, primary and secondary. This is just alignment of the use with the districts, or it seems like we've opened that up a bit.
For education facility,
Yes.
It allows us to have more schools and private school systems by special exception, except for in the by right of C1 and C2. Currently, we don't have private schools, and of course, with the education, it's kind of become a bit of a crisis locally. So that was a way to improve that.
Okay.
But of course, regulate it by special exception. It's not going to
Right.
fit in every situation, but the right one may come along.
So that actually triggered one that I had as well, which was the item right below that.
Yeah.
The emergency management services facility. I personally don't have a problem with that being changed by right. I think the thing that kind of bothers me a little bit about that is that a building operated by a public or private entity. So I'm thinking if it, if we do that by right and a private firm were to come in with loud emergency equipment that's a for-profit entity that isn't necessarily a public service entity like, King George Fire and Rescue. Does anybody have concerns about that, or am I just the only?
So one of the comments that staff made was that, for example, King George County Fire and Rescue would be considered a public use because it would be owned by a government agency. So that's why it says see item 36 below. I believe the intention is to separate them out more for that exact reason.
Okay.
So if we were to focus on a private entity, where would you like to see that in the zoning districts?
I think I think for me, it's just the by right, the sweeping by right elements of it. I don't know that, I know that I wouldn't be too tickled if an ambulance company opened next door to me, on an empty lot. It just seems like it would be detrimental to my slumber.
Yes.
If they had like 60 rigs in then a maintenance garage and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So probably not in any of the agriculture.
So are we saying,
I mean, really?
Yeah.
so do you want to see them by special exception in the agricultural or just not permitted at all? Because keep in mind that those emergency management systems do affect your ISO rating, which is your insurance rating and things of that nature.
Even if it's a private firm?
Don't quote me, but I believe so, that is
Alright.
one of the things that your insurance looks at is, how far are you from emergency management? So I would consider at least by special exception because you might find the right piece of property in the Shiloh district that could be a good fit for a private company. Possibly, not guaranteed, but something to think about.
I don't know what does everyone think about that?
All bids, special exception in agriculture.
And I think we would still have to, and residential. Yeah, and I think we'd still have to put some parameters around it, right? We wouldn't want,
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it until you brought it up, but yeah, I tend to agree with you. I'd almost take it out entirely out of the residentials and maybe do special exception in the agricultural. I don't have a problem with it being in retail, general trade, industrial light. Not sure why it's sitting in the resort community, but
I could, if it were large enough, I could see a resort community wanting their own private, maybe they're, but I don't know that.
But I'm like you. When I think of a residential, I'm not thinking of those kind of functions in there. Now, I recognize that putting a fire station, which is government owned, so they can put it wherever they want.
Right.
That makes some sense, and I'm perfectly understandable. But I wouldn't want to. Can't see us throwing the doors open to a private ambulance service, but maybe it's not inconceivable. So. We don't take it out of residential altogether. I would want to make it
Special exception.
special exception. I'd prefer to take it out altogether.
Thoughts on taking it out altogether? Out of R, yeah.
Okay, so just to be clear, special exception in the ag districts, not permitted in residential.
Until we change our minds.
Or one of us opens a private ambulance company. The rest kind of fall in
The bottom of page 11, recreation thing.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dakota, I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
On page 11, item 38, did we allow private recreation facilities in the A's prior to this? Was that it says it's an addition, I don't know what it replaced. I mean, they could put a arcade, a pinball arcade, and a, recreational.
So this is picnic area, playgrounds, indoor, outdoor athletic recreation, indoor, outdoor shelters. This also includes amphitheaters
And game preserves.
and game preserves.
So if you think about like Wilmot, right, that whole area was locked up as a game preserve.
Well, there's also a shooting preserves now in which you can hire like an organized dove hunt or something of that nature. And that falls under those game preserves.
That's down off of, down near the King George Westmoreland line, right?
I am not sure about that.
I think I was reading this, that this only applies to public. If I read this correctly, our old ordinance had private and they were mixed in and they separated it out.
Right, kind
So-
of like Hop Yard has, their own park, their own clubhouse, etc. This is separating it out. So, do you want by right in all districts the ability to have an amphitheater, game preserves, those kind of uses, soccer fields, things like that for the public, which means it's not privately owned, it would be open to the public and not owned by the government.
Would still be subject to use standards in the future, right?
Well, it's not marked for use standards.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it should be, we want to cover amplified sound.
okay, so we want definitely some standards.
But that, like, so using that example, Ms. Hall, with like a soccer field, so there would have to be a significant parking element to that as well, which would have to meet certain standards though, right? Or
So that would come under our parking standards, not additional setbacks or sound attenuation or things of that nature is more of your standard specific to that use. So you'll have all commercial uses will have to abide by certain parking standards, stormwater calculations, etc. But these uses will get specific standards like
so,
lot size, things of that nature.
but that would be an accompanying element. So I guess the question would be, if we make this by right in pretty much anything, knowing with the peripheral development that would be associated with those, are we just making more work for ourselves by making them all by right, or?
I think that you're opening the door
Right.
more. So,
Okay.
so if you go back to your slumber, I can open up a concert amphitheater in your agricultural district by right.
But it says publicly owned.
Publicly used.
Publicly owned.
Publicly owned.
So
Proposed definition, publicly owned and operated parks.
by who?
We're talking about 38, right?
Right. Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
I think it should be a little
That
bit
was
more
my
defined.
read. Yeah.
Right.
We're collapsing the other one that had private, public.
Not-
And where do the
So then why isn't it
private
under
parks?
public use instead of
It would just be private park.
if I'm a Let's say I'm a developer and I want to open it up to the public.
Yeah, I'm thinking of something like a dirt trail, dirt bike trail. Say my neighbor wanted to put up a dirt bike trail.
Oh, yeah, I've had people call about that.
That's a hypothetical for me. I don't have a neighbor. She's 86.
She's spry.
I mean, hypothetically, trying to think of the types of things that could be noxious,
Right.
or some other consideration.
So is, Ms. Hall, do you know, I mean, because it does reference back to item 36. And then for further streamline the uses, public use can include emergency management services facility as recreation public parks. They are permitted identically. Is that literally a streamlining methodology employed by our consultants, or is that something in code?
I think that we need Berkeley Group to put a little bit more definition to it.
Okay.
Because I think there's a big difference between a county-owned public park versus Celebrate Virginia Live that's open to the public.
Right.
Well, even in a county-owned park, you're gonna give some thought to the neighbors. You know, I mean, lighting, sound levels after a certain time of night. I mean, I can remember when my son was playing travel soccer. You know, I remember one large field put in by the subdivision just for a large open recreation area. And they rented it and started playing night games. And I would not have wanted to have been residing close to that in the middle of the night, unless my own kid was playing there. But, you know, so I'd be okay as long as there were some standards associated with it in residential areas and maybe even agricultural areas. So I'm not trying to make more work for the county or for your staff, but at least they should have some standards saying limiting lighting, limiting sound after a certain, or use after a certain hour of the night, you know, something.
So even if we were to regulate that for a public use, the county does not have to abide by their own zoning regulations.
True, but I'm putting faith
Keep
in the
that in mind.
county. If you do it as out of the recreation department of the county, that they're going to at least give some consideration to the neighboring
We'll
uses.
have a noise ordinance, do we? Do we?
The county has a noise ordinance that is regulated by the sheriff's office.
They were shooting a gun. I read something in the newspaper about it. They felt that enforced that they have to be there.
Right.
when
Like
the noise is
like signs or
happening
anything else.
in your property line.
I think this is.
Okay, so we're gonna note that it needs to be pretty clear whether this is publicly owned by a government agency or could be privately owned, open to the public is a difference. And no matter what, they need standards. Now, if it is intention to be privately owned, open to the public, do you still want to see it by right across the board?
I would reconsider that.
I think so. I think we want to reconsider that because it does seem like it opens the door, to Mr. Kendrick's point, to potential nuisance elements.
Abuse,
Yeah, abuse and we just had a sidebar. Heather, do we have a noise ordinance?
King George County does have a noise ordinance through the county code, which is enforced by the sheriff's office.
Okay. All right, so we'll come back to that one, I guess.
So if it is a privately owned but open to the public park, what zoning classifications do you want to see it in?
Special exception agriculture?
Eyes,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Special exception.
I think it should be a little bit opened up to, well, A1 and A2, that should include cluster.
Whether or not it's clustered doesn't change the use by the zoning
Right, okay.
classification.
Because clusters have you know,
Dedicated,
open space.
right.
yeah, Open space, and it's not used, it's usually just unusable land. Now, this might encourage usable land. for
Well,
development.
so that's a good question, though. If it's a cluster and the land that's reserved in green space were to be proposed as a park, would that be an allowable use, or it's still, if it were like a nature preserve or something, I mean, but it would still have to be, I guess, would it be an allowable use?
So if I remember correctly, the subdivision ordinance does allow them to give or transfer ownership to the county, and they can put a school or a park or things of that nature that they need. However, most of those cluster subdivisions have a private HOA, clubhouse, park, things of that nature. They're not usually open to the public.
So we want to encourage subdivisions, you know, to do playgrounds and recreation areas. I'm not suggesting that I don't want to see any of that inside the residential areas. It's when you write the definition and you start putting in amphitheaters and outdoor athletic or recreational facilities, got to define it somehow or put limitations on it.
Right. I think there's a big difference between a tot lot and an amphitheater.
Oh, yeah.
That
I mean,
need to be broken out. Okay, we can.
Yeah, we take a note, that one needs more work and we keep moving.
Yes, sir.
Well said. All right.
Then we get to page 13. Lots of change on page 13. I'm not sure about all the by right in 42 utility service minor. I don't know, just seems, not sure.
Is that just, I guess that one struck me as I'm surprised that it wasn't by right before. Right? I mean, like power poles and relay lines and things of that nature. If that's what it's limited to, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, but if it's buildings and structures.
right. Yeah. Physical structures, I think, would be the difference.
The minor, square footage, the useful thing to have define a minor structure.
Well, I mean, it says telephone booths.
The telephone booths.
So, I mean, it lends me to the idea that it's not large structures, right?
Right. I think it's aligning with the Code of Virginia, transformers, relay, booster devices, well, water, sewer pump stations. I think it's just more compact and better defined than previous. I don't think that it changed what we're actively doing now.
Okay. It's just a kind of a granularity clarification or
I
something?
believe so, because booster stations in a subdivision, that's at the purview of the service authority. And those are by right use. They're required to provide a public service.
Would that be the same, do you think, for 43 and really 43, I don't know about 44, but.
Yes, this continues to regulate, I'm sure most of you know, Service Authority became because we bought a bunch of old, privately owned well systems.
Mhm.
So this still allows us to regulate any new water services that were to come in.
All right. Anything on 14? 15?
I have a comment. So a shared water system, a maximum of 2 connections and less than 25 persons. That 25 persons is a little odd. Currently
Coming from
by,
Health code?
I'm sorry,
Is that coming from health code?
I don't believe so. I'd have to check, but I know as of right now, you can share your well with one other person. Anything more than one other person would be considered
One other person.
a water authority, one other property, one other home.
There's no
Um,
personnel limit on it, right?
not to my knowledge. Well, it does say that in our old. It must come from somewhere, but I've never used it. But I will say that I know that we talked to Berkeley Group specifically to prohibit. We recently had a major subdivision come in with all shared wells, which is not favorable.
I mean, one well for 2 lots, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
We've had calls from citizens where they get a new owner. There's no, even though there's agreement, they cut off the water source to the neighbor. Then they have to go through court in order to get their water back. Or the neighbor doesn't pay the electricity that runs the pump, so they don't have water. It's just not a good situation to be in. I think it's more designed,
Sure.
if my daughter were to build a house next door that we share a well, etc. But then time goes on, people sell, etc.
So
So is the county service authority allowing shared wells or privately owned community wells anymore?
Not privately owned community wells, but a shared well with one other property or one other house is permitted by right.
I live in a neighborhood with community well, and I get a questionnaire from it's privately owned and operated. I get a questionnaire from the operator periodically asking how many persons dwell in my house. So there is some kind of number of people rather than number of residences limit. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know if it's the county
We
code
can,
or if
it's
it's health
probably
department.
the health department, but we can, have it looked into for sure.
So it sounded like you had reservations about that, Ms. Hall. Do you want to like neck that down or?
I don't think that it should be in major subdivisions. I think that it is more designed for family members to share the cost of a well and not have another well in our aquifer. But as stated, you start out as a family, one of you sells
Dies.
or passes away, yes. And then the agreement, even though it is still valid,
Yeah.
you have to go to court in order to get your water back, which is not a speedy process for somebody to be without water.
So that's something else we'll try to
Reconsider.
revisit. Okay. Page 14. Page 15.
On what page, Mr. DeVries?
Item 48 on page 15.
Okay.
Is that cell towers that we're talking about?
No, I don't think so. Just they put it on top of tower.
I interpreted it as it is. Mounted on something.
Hmm?
I interpret that as,
So
So it's by right now everywhere, so Mr. Parker doesn't get tortured on social media.
Or in the letters to the editor.
Right.
But hold on.
It
but
has
this
a
wouldn't be-
limit of 28 cubic feet.
Right, so this wouldn't be a full cell tower. This would be like something you'd hang off a chimney or something, right?
Right.
Okay.
Like a booster or a repeater or something like that.
Yes.
Refrigerator.
Right.
No, it doesn't say mounted on a tower 120 feet above ground.
And we can ask them to provide more clarification than this definition that they provided. And if I remember correctly, I believe our current ordinance talks about up to 80 feet as an exempt cell tower that doesn't require a special exception.
Over 80 feet.
Require a special exception,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Page 16.
Breweries, distilleries. We're silent on the A's for the A1 and A2, there's no special exception for breweries or distilleries.
So those are in the same line as the agricultural. So I can grow the hops, I can make the beer, I can have the tasting facility by your agricultural regulations by the state. This is more commercialized microbreweries where you open up in a storefront. Yes.
But if like, would it be, would a distiller or brewer like Oak Crest Farms?
As long as they meet the requirements by the agricultural exemption. So if they grow the hops or supplement a certain percentage of the hops, they grow it, they brew it, they have the tasting room. That's under agricultural.
All right.
And then we also talked last month about the new micro wineries. I think that we're going to expand for that too. We recently had a request and I didn't know that those were a thing. So
Micro winery?
a micro winery. Mm-hmm.
There's small portions that are really expensive.
Yeah, there you go.
You're probably right.
All right. Page 17, I believe. We went through a lot of this with the daycare centers. And again, that was, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of that was just bringing it up to code or in alignment with, right? So,
Bringing it up to code and allowing it by special exception for some larger lots, larger homes that can accommodate more children in accordance with state code.
okay. Page 18, we went through some of this already, event venue, financial institution, funeral home. Page 19,
Before we do the 19 commercial greenhouse, they broke it out as general agriculture. So page, item 60, page 19.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Mr. DeCorda?
In A3, it was by right and was deleted.
A3 is typically a 1 acre lot size, and we have very little A3.
almost none.
Yes, and that was the reason. Mhm.
If someone did have an acre, put up a 20,000 square foot greenhouse, sell houseplants up.
Not if they're zoned A3.
Yeah. Just curious why it was deleted.
Because of the small lot size and the very little A3 that we have in the county was the consideration.
All right.
Some of these cannabis cultivators under the.
You gotta speak into your mic, sir. I can't hear you.
I recommend we put it back to SE. Special exception,
For A3,
grade 3. For 1 acre holdings, we don't think of them as productive agricultural areas anymore. Maybe we want to rethink that.
I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with SE, or special exception. Anybody?
Well, I don't know about retail sales of fertilizers, pesticides, but a special exception that would.
Yeah.
Yep.
We go back to item 59.
No.
Yeah, I know a guy who does orchids. He's like an orchid babysitter. People drop off their orchids when they go out of flower, and he turns $100K a year on about half this building's worth of
Wow.
infrastructure.
Watching plants grow.
Yeah, and meeting people, they bring and they come pick them up and bring them back. Orchid daycare.
So 59 specifically, I'm looking at the language speaking to crematoriums.
Yes, sir.
Berkeley Group recommends breaking that out, and they refers to item 82. And I agree with that. I see them as separate services. And I think moving them to a crematorium, moving it to a more industrial environment is more correct.
Didn't we just pass that to allow crematoriums?
Yes, so Stork Funeral Home recently built a crematorium after having that passed by this planning commission.
So did that change the ordinance, or is that a special exception for that?
No, previously crematoriums were not addressed by our ordinance, if I remember correctly, and we came in with a text amendment which allowed them as an accessory use.
So we have the opportunity now we can put that in writing and define that going forward.
Well, I think that there's also two different situations. So if I have a funeral home and I have an accessory use, which is secondary to my primary as a crematorium, versus my business is crematory all day, every day, and I have this huge industrial building that just cranks them out all day. I think that those are two different uses.
Yeah.
And Berkeley handled them that way on page 25.
Right. And I know that we had a conversation with Berkeley to identify that we recently made that change for the Storks to have that accessory. So I think they're looking for a little bit of guidance there. Do we want to keep it as accessory, but also have, maybe some limitations of at what point do you become an industrial crematorium?
No more than 2 incinerators.
Mhm.
So I guess above that becomes industrial.
I can't hear you.
It says no more than 2 incinerators as an accessory use. So above that, does that become industrial then?
Yes.
Like at 3 incinerators?
Mhm.
I think you could handle it by standards, limiting it to 2. Otherwise, you're going to have medical waste disposal and
Yeah.
whole class of biohazards.
All right, so I think we were getting on to page 20, which is where we get into not a lot of changes there. 21 is where we started talking about a little bit more of the business areas of things, some minor changes there. 22, you do see some larger changes, but mostly special exceptions. If anybody has any comments on that, again, going back, Mr. Kendrick specifically on some of the outdoor and commercial recreation entertainment. But Some of this looks like it's, again, just maybe updated language.
Yes, for the outdoor commercial recreation, you do have some by right in there. I'm assuming you want to add standards there as well. On number 73.
Mhm. But wouldn't it be correct to say, like, for instance, with a marina, that wouldn't be completely within our purview to approve anyway, right? Wouldn't the Chesapeake Bay Act or Game and Inland Fisheries,
Anything,
somebody have?
so there's several layers of jurisdiction with a marina. So anything past mean low water is VMRC, Virginia Marine
Right,
Resource
okay.
Commission, mean low to mean high, and then there's some additional language of where it can be expanded for the Wetlands Board. But then the Ches Bay and the outside of the 100-foot is where you would have jurisdiction with your zoning ordinance. And there are some exceptions for water-dependent structures in the Ches Bay,
Okay.
which piers, docks, things of that, boat ramps, those are water dependent structures. Possibly even maybe like the, I'm not thinking of the correct term, but where you bring your boat in for service just off that dock, the rail, things like that would be considered water dependent.
Okay.
So you do have purview, but there's different layers of jurisdictions there. So if a new marina were to come in, they would need VMRC approval, wetlands approval, as well as zoning and Ches Bay approval.
Wow.
Yes, very involved.
Right. 22, page 23.
Oh, real quick on 22 at the top, personal services. This would be covered under the home occupation standard or the new business, small business provisions.
I do believe that last month when Berkeley was here, we talked about hair salons with maybe one chair, things
Tax
like that.
preparers.
I'm sorry.
Tax preparers.
Tax preparers, yes.
All right. 23. Again, some special exception additions to small stores. 24, we get some other small changes, additional language. And that wraps up all of that until we get into commercial on page 25. There's no comments on 25.
Well, the adult use is.
We love that one.
I think Berkeley has experience with others, but see their argument.
Well, I mean, they're permitted in the county. It's just very, very tight criteria and constraints where they can go.
Yeah,
We went through this 10 years ago.
we have to have it somewhere.
Did we choose not to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It ended up being like at the bottom of an abandoned gravel pit. It's the only place they could go.
What did we do though?
If
Industrial?
it was industrial,
Industrial
like,
heavy or-
I don't remember. I think it was industrial. But there was proximity to schools, proximity to houses, proximity to a bunch of things.
We have it in our ordinance now.
So like left the crack open door.
So
crack.
we do have sexually oriented businesses. We have a whole ordinance on that.
Yeah.
And if you look at the notes to the side, you kind of have to regulate it somewhere. Otherwise, it falls into the category of retail sales.
Yeah.
And then it's permitted in all your commercial area.
I mean, I think it should stay because eventually, the first thing's gonna happen is we delete it and then we'll need it, So, yeah, and exactly, it covers us in the event of any kind of litigious action.
Leave it.
Yeah, I think we just leave it.
They're recommending adding SE. Are you recommending under, commercial, which I think is problematic, but that doesn't mean I agree.
So you have to give them an avenue to apply somewhere. Otherwise, it reverts back to retail sales, which is permitted everywhere. So I think the solution they suggested
Somewhere.
is C1, but you could make it even harder and go to a special exception in industrial.
I think special exception is the key.
Yeah.
That requires a public hearing, and I think that keeps that door
Can I put it in industrial?
fairly cracked.
We would need a consensus from the planning commission.
I'm not
I'm sorry.
doing anything other than suggesting.
No, I agree about special exception. It's discretionary and we don't have to state anything about yes or no.
Yeah.
So do we keep special exception in the C1 district, or are we moving it to the industrial district?
I think moving it to C1 is actually relaxing it a little bit, isn't it?
I believe with the parameters of the old ordinance. And I do think that Berkeley Group's going to go back and take another look at that and incorporate some of that work that Matt did.
I'm just thinking about maybe practical applications. C1, we may have a little bit more leeway in denying a special exception, not saying that we want to go into it with that bend, but if it's an industrial, you could get something fairly seedy, Just thinking out loud.
Yeah, if it's an industrial, we won't have anybody come to the public hearing. If it's in C1, we will.
Exactly.
It has to live somewhere.
Yeah, I think where it's at is probably good for now, but you said they're gonna revisit it and look at.
I believe that was one of the items. I don't think they realized we had a whole ordinance
Okay.
dedicated to it, so they're going to take another look.
All right, anything else on 25? If not, we'll go to 26. Pretty upfront. I do think we did talk about putting food trucks in all of the categories, provided that there was ample parking and.
Yes,
Such.
with pretty heavy suggested standards.
Yep. Okay. Nothing else on 26 and 27.
So the tradesperson service 89, that was close to the Class C equivalent of the Westmoreland trade, or is this distinctly different?
Think of these, as I understand it, these are for over that size threshold or the Westmoreland.
I think the Westmoreland one was for smaller businesses that allowed it in A1 through 3, right?
Yeah. You're right. Yep. Okay.
All righty, page 27. How much there?
Battery energy storage facility.
We put that in with solar farms, right, Ms. Hall?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Line 90, battery storage. Wasn't that something we put in with solar farms back some time ago?
We did a text amendment specific to battery storage, and this is not changing.
Okay.
They do have notes to keep and update the current standards for battery storage.
Cool. All right, nothing else?
I mean, if someone wants to build a battery storage for a data center, can he put it on a?
Well, a data center is only allowed in industrial, so those go hand in hand.
Right, but the battery storage center can be anywhere.
The battery storage goes in industrial by right.
That's the only place you can cite a battery storage facility is in industrial.
Correct. Which is the same standard as a data center. A data center is only permitted by industrial use.
All right, page 28. Got the addition of special exception for heavy manufacturing. Straightforward. Page 29, nothing really too much different there. Page 30. Not a lot there. Page 31. Then we get over to page 32 where we do see some changes specific to accessory structures, and don't know if anybody wants to chat about this a little bit. If not, we move to 33.
Can we go back to 29, Chair?
Sure.
On the manufacturing light, item 96, it is currently restricted to by right in industrial. And I am thinking of enterprises like a guitar manufacturer. I mean, someone who handcrafts guitars, a luthier, an artisan, a potter, you know, who.
So manufacturing light is by right in the industrial and industrial light.
Would
So
you?
you're talking about like people who make guitars, you want those kind of in that rural business category?
That with the with the retail front, but in the back they either repair guitars, repair bicycles.
I think as long as their primary use is the retail and their accessory use is the repair, and that usually goes hand in hand. It's when their primary use is making guitars, like a warehouse, a manufacturing warehouse. It's where this comes into play.
But that's the same, well. Okay, it's just, providing something like the Westmoreland thing can be developed, I think that will address my concerns for the, one of the apprentice and master, one of the shops, the enterprise like that.
Small store 77 does include things like arts and craft shops, which I think some of those can fit under, especially like a sort of a small scale guitar manufacturer, I think could fit under that craft.
As an artisan.
Right. I know a sculptor. A sculptor makes things, big things. He was looking to come here, but he found somewhere else. He's a solo artist. So he doesn't have a foundry or 5 employees.
I think we were on 33,
Mhm.
page 33. Nothing else there. We will get to our penultimate page 34. And then, finally, page 35, which is pretty light. So, good discussion. Anybody has anything else? I think we got a number of takeaways from that, Ms. Hall. We can pass back to the Berkeley group. So thank you all for going through that again. I know that was a bit of an exercise, but obviously pretty important as we move forward with all of our zoning and ordinance updates. So appreciate that. If there's no further discussion on that, we'll move on to the rural small business example.
I think that you guys pretty much hit on this last month. But again, you didn't get it in your packet, so I wanted to give you one more chance to take a look and make sure that there was nothing that we didn't previously discuss that you wanted to add to it. But Berkeley Group is working on a like ordinance for
Okay.
King George County.
So they're coming through that, and then we'll see the language when they're,
Yes, sir.
okay, awesome. Cool. Well, if there's no additional thoughts on that, that brings us to something that seems like it comes around way too often, and that is the capital improvement program review.
Yes, so it is that time again. At this time, staff is just asking that you schedule the public hearing for your July 12th regularly scheduled meeting. We did go ahead and print your CIP Excel spreadsheet, so please hang on to those. I thought that they might be a little difficult to do just by looking on your tiny tablet screens there. So at that public hearing, the county administrator will open the floor to kind of the state of the county financially, et cetera. Maybe give you a little update of what projects have been completed from past CIP projects, and then we'll go and hear from each director for their projects as slated on the CIP. At that time, you will rate them on your level of urgency, the 1 to 10 scale. About a week after that, they will be due, and we will take the average. And at your August meeting, you will finalize those recommendations to the board, which some of you have done many times and some of you haven't yet experienced.
What date did you need the meeting for? July?
It's July 12th, which is your regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay. And do we ask for a motion for public hearing for that?
I need a motion to schedule it. Yes, sir.
Okay, so we would like to request a motion for public hearing for July 12th to review the capital improvement plan for FY 22 through FY 26.
So moved.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. Next up on the agenda is the director's report.
All right. In the month of April, we did 17 new single-family homes and a total of 116 permits, revenue of $67,553. We did receive a new commercial project for Pyramid Healthcare, which will be over off Owens Drive for a 28,000 square foot medical facility.
Where's that at?
It is in between the sheets and the storage building. It kind of loops around the back there.
Oh, in Dahlgren, off 624.
Yes.
Okay. No, it's not.
I'm sorry.
That's tight.
Sorry, I was just thinking out loud. There's not a lot of space there.
Swampy, isn't it?
There is more than what I remembered as well. When you look at it on the map, it kind of opens up behind there. Because I had the same thought you did.
So I guess I'm thinking road frontage.
Yes, very little road frontage. Also, which will be in the board report, we did receive an application from Founders Hill for a rezoning, which has now been renamed to Courthouse Commons. But they preliminarily had some inconsistencies. Of course, some of you may remember this was an old project that has been kind of revised over time. And they have, as of today, asked to table that they want to come back and fine tune their application.
Is that the one off Indiantown?
Yes, sir.
The old,
It's the web.
South
project.
Hall Farm?
No,
No.
it's across the street directly. There's 2 abandoned houses there, and it loops
Yeah,
around to
yeah.
Milne.
The roundabout.
Yes.
Okay, so what do they want to do now?
So they have recently resubmitted for their rezoning. I believe Friday. Preliminarily, staff looked at it. They are still referencing some older documents, like an old comprehensive plan. So we have reached out to them and asked that maybe they want to revisit their application. They agreed. They're going to put that on hold. But that project did make it onto the board's director's report. So I wanted to make sure you had that information as well.
Do they want to rezone to?
Yeah.
They want to rezone to C2 and R3. They had a commercial component. They had several commercial components. I believe fast food, a medical facility, medical offices, a church,
That was the nucleus of the mixed use.
a retail center.
Yeah.
I believe a nursing home. And then they also had a residential side with villas, townhomes, and single family dwellings.
And they're,
Yeah, well, I mean,
That's a good question.
they're rezoning it from what, A2 or 1?
A2, I believe. Now there is a commercial component in the front portion of that property already. I believe their plan is to expand that.
so, and the developer or the applicant is aware that that's not in the settlement area?
To my knowledge, yes, they are. However, they still reference an old settlement area, which was our very preliminary review of their application. Just kind of a friendly reach out. Hey, you might want to recheck some things. Do you want us to move forward? Do you want us to hold off? And they went ahead and said, go ahead and put it on the shelf for now. We'll resubmit.
Okay.
But it's back. It's under Founders Hill LLC, but it is signed by Mr. Webb. I will say that the residential component is far less than 660.
660, if I remember correctly.
I think that's correct. I believe we're closer to like 150, 200, if I remember correctly, for the residential side.
Well, by right, they could probably do at least 80 or more in there, right?
I think that they reference like 60-ish. Again, this is all by memory, so don't quote me on it. But yes.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thanks. Keep us updated on that one.
Anytime.
Any other hot news in the director's report?
That's it.
All right. That moves us on to other business, of which we have none this evening, and that moves us on to our final item of the night, which is the. Hold on. Sorry, Mr. Moss is going to keep us till midnight.
Yes, sorry. Where do the requirements for fire hydrants come in?
Those would be from the fire department. So when we get a new subdivision that's on public water, we do send those to the fire department for review.
So it just runs hand in hand with any subdivision.
For any commercial project as well.
Mm.
They review for, make sure that they have proper fire lane striped, knock boxes. They have their own line of review. So just like we send those applications out to VDOT, we also send them to the fire department, health department, service authority, whichever, anyone that would apply. We have that authority to send it out.
I ask because in the subdivision that I'm in, there are none.
Do you have public water?
No.
That's why. They are not required if there's no public water. Because you wouldn't, my very limited knowledge is that you wouldn't be able to provide the amount of suppression that would be required for that fire hydrant. And you're presumably on individual wells.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I live on a community. For other houses, there's no fire hydrant on my street.
mhm.
Yeah, it's a pressure issue, right?
I'm gonna put a big tower
All right. All in, all done? There's no other business. I'll ask for motion to adjourn. Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Everybody have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of your
I'm
flag day.
sorry, who seconded that?
Yeah.
Mr. Moss? Okay.